on, these are grammatical words, but the main meaning of the word is contained in words like the group was divided on timing. That's why our voice stresses these words more. The group was divided on timing. When we do that, and when we do that in a long conversation, we are able to follow a natural rhythm and a natural intonation. So think about developing these skills with your candidates. Let's take a look at our language toolkit. These are things that we've talked about so far, but what should be in your candidate's language toolkit to effectively summarize this group discussion? Firstly, you can introduce phrases that I said earlier would be useful. So, functional language for different purposes. Functional language as introductory phrases would be very helpful here. So, starting by saying things like the discussion focused on this, or the participants talked about this, the conversation explored this. You can give your learners a variety of these phrases so that they can use the sentence as a starter and then replace the remainder of the sentence with the actual topic. So they can use the keywords from the discussion and use these sentences or these phrases to make good long sentences. Next, and very important in their language toolkit, would be a variety of reporting verbs. It's also a good idea to teach reporting verbs according to their function. What are verbs that are used to support someone's points or to oppose someone's points, to explain something or have a neutral stance? What are reporting verbs to emphasize something? Once again, if a candidate is able to show some variety in these expressions, their chances of getting a higher score increase. For synthesis, it is again important to look at relationship connectors. These are phrases that also help with coherence, using words like the speakers agreed on this. One participant argued, conversely, someone said this. Although they shared concerns, however, they said this. Using these connecting phrases will help them to show the relationship between different points. And then finally, developing paraphrasing techniques is definitely important. So, using other words in place of the words that are in the discussion, using synonyms or similar words, or expanding an idea, or replacing a reporting verb with something else. So, simple repetition of the words is not enough. It is important to also show that you know another word for it, or that you are able to express the same idea in your own words. Now, something that is important to remember when we're looking at this language toolkit is that when we talk about functional language or these introductory phrases, these are not memorizable answers. These are only phrases that help a candidate. So, giving your candidates or giving your students phrases is always helpful because this is not a full answer. These are phrases that are useful for many different purposes. If they can use these as a starter sentence and then add the key points from their notes, their answer should be relevant and original. Now, candidates might, of course, have problems with certain things, but when it comes to this type of an answer, a natural phrasing is important. A natural way of speaking is important, using a variety of expressions. So consider using these language toolkit ideas, using functional language, introducing different reporting verbs, connecting phrases, and paraphrasing techniques. All of these together will help the candidate to develop their answer in the best possible way. Now we'll talk a little bit about note taking as well, which is an important skill to develop for this type of question. As you know, the candidate will be given a notepad and a pen or a marker at the test center, so they can take notes. However, taking notes is an important skill to develop. Here is a sample of what an effective note taking strategy for this question type can look like. This is again based on the same structure that we discussed, starting with the topic and then making notes for each speaker. This is a good format to follow because this will help the candidate to use the same format while they actually speak. So if they make notes in this format, they can simply use the same format as their organization or as their format for the summary. Starting with the topic, then talking about speaker one, talking about speaker two, talking about speaker three. Between these, they can show agreement, disagreement, and any other synthesis. But this is a useful format to consider. Something you will notice here is that the notes are very concise. There is a lot of use of short forms to save time. So instead of writing university, simply writing uni is useful because it saves time. Using common abbreviations. So instead of writing about, just ABT is helpful. Using punctuation marks like no time. If a speaker says there is no time to do something, if you use an exclamation point here, this is useful because it reminds you of the tone you're supposed to use here. Also consider using other short forms and emoji or symbols. So if the speakers are talking about something that's pleasant or happy, using an emoji of a smiley face is helpful here. They can also use other symbols like arrows to show if something is going up or down. At the end, you see here there's a question mark after the last point, which means that the speakers are considering something. They have not decided, but they're discussing, shall we go to a seminar? So think about using effective note-taking strategies and how the student can learn to use short forms, symbols, and abbreviations using this simple format. Okay. Now, I do understand, I'm looking at some of your responses in the chat as well. I do understand that it might sometimes be difficult for students who are working at a lower level to construct long answers. However, it is our task to remind students that this question type is based on a very realistic scenario. These are things that they will genuinely need at university level. So if they start developing these skills right now, of course, it's useful for the purpose of the exam, but this is also a long-term skill that they are developing that will be useful at a real university. Along with that, we discussed the use of functional language. Now, as I said, functional language avoids memorizing a complete answer because it's not possible to memorize a full answer when you don't know what the discussion is about. However, functional language is helpful because it gives the student a starter sentence. So if we provide them with 2 or 3 examples or 4 examples of a good functional language set, such as sentences to start, sentences to show agreement or disagreement, simple phrases at lower level learners, for lower level learners, this will help them develop some confidence along with teaching them note taking so that they can combine these two things in the actual test. So both of these things together are important. Using a functional language phrase and then picking up the point from their own notes. So we will need to focus on both of these. Once again, let's talk a little bit. And I see some of you have already shared some ideas in the chat. This is what we were talking about. So my question to you is, how does functional language ensure that the response is original and relevant in the PTE academic test? And these functional language phrases are not just used for beginnings, they can also be used in the middle of the conversation. They can be used to connect ideas. They can be used to show agreement or disagreement, as I mentioned. So, functional language is structural. It helps a student start, it helps them continue, it helps them conclude, but it's not memorized, which means that they will have to combine it with their own words. That's what will make their answer original. This is a summary. So, functional language, it will help your students develop answers more originally because it will give them a chance to paraphrase instead of simply repeat. It will give them a chance to use summarizing phrases, use agreeing and disagreeing phrases, and it will give them a chance to structure their answer. So we've already talked about all of these things. This is simply an example or a summary of what we spoke about. All right. Let's continue, everyone. We'll talk about some common mistakes. A lot of you have already shared some things in the chat, so I'm going to take a summary. So it does not just need to be a repetition. It does not need any personal information, just needs to be a summary. No need to add any information that is not correct. No need to add any new information. Another common mistake to avoid is which speaker said what. That's why note taking is so important, so that we can put relevant points under that speaker's name. Also important to remember that it's not a good idea to mention every single point. It's a summary. Summaries include main points, not every single point. Speaking for too little time, something to avoid. It needs to be a summary of the full discussion. Not connecting ideas to each other. And not using any natural phrases. So introducing your ideas in a very mechanical or the same pattern every single time. Very good. A lot of you have the same ideas in the chat. So these are some common things to avoid. Let's take a look at a sample response, and this will help us get a better idea of all of the things that we have so far talked about. Prompt that we saw earlier, where we saw a sample question type. Here's a QR code that you can scan, which will take you to the tape script that you can download. For now, I'm only going to display this as text. At this QR code, as I mentioned, you will be able to download this tape script. This is something you So as the candidate is listening, they are taking notes. Then they have 10 seconds to prepare and 2 minutes to give a response. And we'll talk about whether this is a good or an average response. It feels like this answer has not differentiated between the key points said by each speaker. It does mention speakers differently. So one student says this, another student says this, but it doesn't specify which speaker said what. So speaker one, speaker two, speaker three, it says one student and another student. That could be anyone. That means there is a scope for the points getting jumbled. So it is important to follow the note-taking pattern. Start with the topic, speaker one, speaker two, and speaker three. That is a reasonable format to use so that the candidate can show full comprehension. Let's take a look at this sample answer. This, as you will see, is being called an excellent sample answer. You will see here, this sample answer uses the same format that the note-taking used. It starts with the topic, moves on to what the first speaker talked about. All the key points mentioned by the first speaker have been included in this section. Then moves on to the second speaker. All the key points said by the second speaker are covered here. And then the third speaker, you will also notice that it uses a variety of phrases, talked about his concerns, agreed with much of what was said. The speaker mentioned, had a particular concern. There are phrases that show how each speaker agreed or disagreed with each other. Each speaker's points are balanced, which means there's an equal amount of information for each of them. And it's a summary that includes the full discussion. Talk about some practical classroom activities that you can use. Think about giving students, yes, there is a possibility to use phrases like or filler words like that's all right, as long as it sounds natural, as long as it is not something that is being overly done, that's all right. Some summary speed round activities that you could do in classroom. This is something that will help students practice under timed conditions.